I still do have to go make an ROI case to get the tools to protect the AI, right? That I still have to have those discussions. But every CFO worth their salt out there is looking at this. How do I improve my margins? How do I improve my customer retention? How do I, reduce my time to close? AI is in a position to improve how businesses operates in a way that hits pretty much every measure that a CFO is paying attention to.
Welcome to the Information Week Podcast. I'm your host, Senior Editor Zhao Pierre Ruth. Today's episode, we are talking about tech bets that CTOs and CISOs might want to support, even when there may be an uncertain ROI that they are looking at with that technology bet. The return on investment can be hazy for some technologies. That might be because there's shifting timetables, development cycles, or there could be circumstances where the technology itself needs to prove itself out in specific niche and unique situations. So how does a CTO or a CISO kind of keep the rest of the executive suite on board with their tech plans when there might be some questions about how this might all pan out? So for today's episode, we are joined by Richard Mackey, CTO for CCS Medical. Richard, good to be seeing you.
Nice to see you, JP.
And we're also joined by Heather Hinton, CISO for Sitecore. Heather, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, great. All right. So there are plenty of other technologies out there. We can talk about, the potential uncertain ROI that you're dealing with, but let's get the big one out of the way in the beginning. AI is the obvious technology that the world is watching to see what the real ROI might be from. Might come from for that. In addition to that, are there other technologies that you individually have been championing within your organizations? Or if we're going to, kick back to AI, are there nuanced, less obvious aspects of AI that you've been betting on that you're trying to, make sure that the rest of your organization, really gets their arms around to understand, what might be further down the road with that? Richard, why don't you kick us off with your thoughts?
Sure. So we are strong adopters of agentic. We see a big opportunity with agentic AI. We've deployed that at scale at the enterprise level and targeted largely at the contact center. So we now have an agentic solution that is fielding our initial inbound calls. And we've done quite a bit to train models to be able to have conversations around chronic care management. I think one thing that's important for folks to understand or realize, and it's part of what's so important for us as an organization, is that we're helping support people that are managing chronic care conditions. So when we are trying to make it easier for them to stay on a CGM therapy or whatever the case might be, pump therapy, right? It's of critical, importance for them as people. And so we see a great opportunity to be able to not just have an ROI from an efficiency point of view with some of these tools, specifically agentic in this case, but also to improve the patient experience, to improve their quality of life through making it easier for them to stay on these therapies and have some of the systems do some more of the heavy lifting for them. So that's an important part. And I won't go into detail unless you want to hear now, or if we want to follow up on it later. But I think that for us, the nuanced part of AI has been a build out of a capability. So, everything I just talked about is very much at the enterprise level, being able to help us support and interact with patients and to be able to do that more efficiently. We also, though, before we did this piece of it, really went bigger with predictive analytics and being able to use machine learning and AI in that setting and context to be able to help us understand what are the risks for non-adherence. What makes somebody start using a CGM and 6 months later, a year later, stop using it? And so by better understanding all of the various data flows that we have access to and using proven tools in other industries, be it marketing or financial systems, right, industries, we've been able to deploy some of those capabilities internally and not just know who has a risk of maybe not being adherent 6 months down the line, but actually being able to intervene and do things differently in our workflows with those patients to help them then stay on therapy. So it's a bit of a spin where we deployed first a product and capability that was very much externally kind of patient-facing, market-facing, to be able to help those folks better stay on therapy.
Gotcha. Heather, how about you with your operations? What are some of the technologies that you're, betting on and you're trying to, make sure that the rest of the board is understanding?
I'm going to be a little bit sort of hair splitting. We're not betting on agentic. We're betting on MCP. And then also really, I'm going to give sort of two flavors to this answer. Internally, really all in on some of the amazing tools and features that are coming for development that are helping our developers be really effective with automated threat intelligence, with threat modeling, with automated remediation of vulnerabilities. So what is coming with the tools that are being used in the development space are, I think, game-changing for the effectiveness of both my developers and of our platform to respond to vulnerabilities. And if you've been watching the news, you know, of course, that with things like the zero-day clock and with what's happening with these incredibly powerful new models, that we as an industry, if we are building code or hosting code, have to be really good at addressing the vulnerabilities, right? So there's that. And I would talk about how that I'm using that both defensively and offensively within the company. But what we at Sitecore are doing is really interesting because we are at the forefront of we're a marketing firm, and we are at the forefront of how people engage in the internet. How do they search for things? How do companies present? So how does a company that is offering life-saving therapy, gene therapy, genetic testing, medical devices, how they interact with their existing customers and future customers, how those people search for solutions, and then people aren't searching on Google anymore. They're searching in ChatGPT, right? So we are using AI there and exposing MCP to our customers so that they can then turn around and be so much more effective in this new world with getting their message, their services out to their customers, enabling them to be more effective, enabling them to get the services to the customers that need it in a timely manner without having to go down a bazillion rat holes. And that is, I think, an incredibly powerful part of this. And we spend so much time talking about the doom and gloom of AI that I just want to jump in and say, this is an area where this will actually improve the lives of lots of people. And I think that's, you started out by asking, I think, about ROI. I don't know how to put an ROI on improving somebody's life, but it's pretty darn big.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's get diving in more on the ROI, particularly when you're looking at, you're presenting these technologies to your organizations and getting the rest of the folks to say, okay, why are we making these expenditures to go this route? What kind of timetables do you set up? How do you structure a timetable for technologies that are still in these spaces where the certainty of what it means for the bottom line might still have questions out there? How do you kind of really structure that?
I'm going to jump in and say that's what's so interesting is AI has turned that entire conversation on its head. I'm not having to go and make a case about how this is going to improve the business, right? I'm having to go and make the case of, guys, this will improve the business. We all 100% agree, but it's only going to improve the business if we do this in a way that is mindful and is going to protect our intellectual property, protect our data, protect all of the things that we always protect. So what makes AI as a thing so much more interesting is that I don't have to make an ROI conversation anymore. And now it's actually becoming almost harder, if I don't want to say impossible, but extremely difficult to make an ROI conversation, because the areas where we're seeing improvements are not the areas where we have the baselines that we need to measure ROI. Right? Do I have a baseline on how much time people spend checking their calendar every day and preparing for their meetings? Probably not. But is everybody on my team using that to be more productive on their day? 100%. I don't know how to measure that.
Richard, how about for you?
I think in our case, so as I mentioned before, one of the places we target is in our contact center. So we have been able to not necessarily replace humans, but we've been able to shift the mix. So we do have hard lines to the P&L where we see efficiency show up in the form of certain numbers of people doing certain kinds of tasks that is different than what we had before. And I think similar to what Heather said, this conversation has been exciting and interesting because it is a bit different. When we started talking about generative and deploying it in this way in certain cases, so for example, when folks are on the phone, a summary of those call history, right? That was part of our SOPs. We have people that are, taking notes as they go or recording that. And that's now been replaced and automated with this. And there's still a human in the loop. They're editing that, making sure that it's accurate. But it's a very good example where it takes a very specific amount of time that is less than what we had before. And the quality is much better. I think the other big thing that we see in our kind of ROI conversations is that we've helped shift some of the interaction. It could be some things like the accuracy of the notes, but it can also be things like understanding different people's accents on the phone. We found that some of our agents are much better at understanding what various dialects or forms of English might be as people are communicating. And so we've gotten good success from that. And I think the part that Heather spoke of around the patient experience, that's obviously very important to us as well. And that's a little bit harder to kind of put a specific value on that. But we know that people that interact with these tools appreciate their always on nature, appreciate that they can be understood and that they can get to, places where they need to go. It's also kind of fun and interesting to know that some people have a natural aversion to it right out of the gate, right? And they do not want to be talking to a machine. And so we're working through some of that adoption, but I think it highlights that the interesting parts of some of what we're doing are not so much about the technology itself, but they are about how people embrace it, receive it, either positive or on the other side of the spectrum.
Okay. Sense I'm getting is our CFOs just all on board with anything that's AI related for technology investment, or there might be other elements or.
Well, they're absolutely on board for, and this is the CISO speaking, they're 100% on board for the AI for productivity improvement, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes not. I still do have to go make an ROI case to get the tools to protect the AI, right? That I still have to have those discussions. But every CFO worth their salt out there is looking at this. How do I improve my margins? How do I improve my customer retention? How do I, reduce my time to close? AI is in a position to improve how businesses operates in a way that hits pretty much every measure that a CFO is paying attention to.
In our case, too, very similar, right? We've seen that through this agentic program, our forecast is for a 30% operating expense reduction over a 2-year period, right? So very hard, specific targets based on P&L management, and we are tracking to those at the moment, right? So I think the other part of this that's been helpful is that there's a fairly decent speed to the return, right? It's not, some of the other projects that we've worked on have been longer in terms of duration, but by the nature of the work that we're doing and the way that it transforms some of how the work is done, it has been a quicker path in some instances. Not to say that it's easy, right? But it's been a quicker path in some cases. And I think the financial community or other stakeholders appreciate that.
Do you have to get other stakeholders on board? I mean, once you get the CFO, CEO on board with what you want to do, is that kind of like, you're off to the races, or there are other elements, other folks that you really need, other stakeholders you need to get kind of like on board with?
It helps. It helps. But I think in this case, for our initial experience has been that it's even broader than other technology deployments or projects that we've worked on. Part of it is that it's AI and it's new, and I think people are interested and motivated to be a part of that. But it impacts the marketing team, the patient experience team, the HR team, right, from an employee perspective. So because it's so different in some cases, it's much more cross-functional than some of our other initiatives.
I'm finding it really interesting because all of my stakeholders are on board, right? And from that, I'm loving this as a moment in time. This is like the only moment in time where everybody is wanting to do something and pulling in the same direction. And what I'm finding again as a CISO, that this is allowing me to change the conversations that I have, in particular about how do I secure environments, right? So my peers and I are finding that for the first time, we aren't seeing as much resistance in discussions about uplifting security in terms of development or workstation or email or whatever. Across the board, there have been enough scary stories in all the news that when we find these people who are gung-ho and want to do this, and we say, that's great, you want to do this, and here's how we're going to do this in a way that protects the business. For the first time, people are going, oh yeah, I get it. And they're now on board with us. And so I think this is a hidden part of ROI that we really should not be neglecting, which is how we are using this in one area to help uplift other areas of the business. And so it really is not just one part of the business increasing, it's a rising tide. The entire business is improving in its discipline, its operation, its posture, your NPS scores, your general customer retention, people retention across the board done properly. There really truly are more positives than not.
All right. Well, talking about positives or not, let's talk about any cautionary tales that either of you have seen, either internally or even externally, when new technology was either introduced or spoken about, across your sector, that you learned from after you saw, okay, this was an emerging thing, and then when it actually shook out, this actually, was like tempered your expectations or tempered your approach to how you, want to introduce or work with new technologies. Any cautionary tales that you can recall that speak to how you kind of approach the way you introduce technology with your organizations?
I think in our case, oh, sorry, Heather, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, go ahead.
I think in our case, some of the pieces when you're working with agentic and LLMs, there are the examples that folks have talked about with the hallucinations. And, in our case, some of the various scenarios that we've tested for and developed against because of the nature of these tools, there are just certain things that happen in production that you wouldn't expect or necessarily anticipate. One interesting one, we had somebody ask to be transferred to a human representative that spoke Spanish, and our agent was ambitious and tried to start speaking Spanish itself to be able to, even though in other ways we had managed that to ensure that wouldn't happen. So we were able to learn from that and adjust and deploy. But there have been a few examples like that where things that we hadn't anticipated or the exact sequence of events of the interaction wasn't what was anticipated. And so we've learned from those and continue to grow with that. But I think, again, as we talked about from the change point of view, there's some lessons that you learn, and then you can also learn from other organizations and from third parties that are helping you to stand up that capability. And I think, some interesting things along the way, but in all cases, building the learning mechanisms that are both external and internal to be able to address and respond and to improve over time are the most important parts of that for me.
I'll jump in. Yeah, look, this is all about communication and change management, as is everything. I think that I don't want to say that it's necessarily learning, but reinforcement. Find the people that want to be the early adopters that are already using the technology, get them on board, bring them into the tent, and enable them, and then have them go and be the champions in the rest of the organization. And that's how you knock off a lot of the slop use that we sometimes see, because I've certainly received emails and reports from people that I know were AI generated and that I know are incorrect. And I spend more time fixing them, right? We do still see that. But if I am really focused on a champion-based and enablement, I've explained everything. So again, communicate. We are being far more effective, and we are accelerating in rates that, quite frankly, are kind of scary, because I've never seen a technology not only be adopted so quickly, but also just continue to evolve. And that is something that, again, is working in our favor, because what we can say is, look, what you were doing 3 months ago doesn't apply anymore. you have to stay on top of it. We have to work together. And so it's allowing us to collaborate with our customers, with their end users, with our stakeholders internally in ways that we would never have been incented to do prior.
Gotcha. Okay. Right. Well, I appreciate your insight on those topics. And for those of you who are listening, I have raised the Ninja Turtles game screen, which means it is now time for Questionable Ideas, our tabletop exercise where our panelists will be put through their paces as interim executives with a fictional company called Questionable Ideas. These scenarios were not shared in advance with our panelists, and while the narratives may be a bit over the top intentionally, they do speak to today's topics. As always, our panel is not responsible for the presence of goblins, gremlins, and kobolds in these scenarios. That is entirely my fault. Okay, so Richard, Heather, you are going to be interim executives for Questionable Ideas. You have the same rights, powers, and privileges that you expect to have, in addition to calling in emergency resources to deal with these particular scenarios. And for just kind of a bit of the background of this, the gremlins in the organization represent a bit of chaotic personalities in terms of like, let's just kind of try things and potentially break things intentionally. Goblins want to move fast, not necessarily trying to be destructive, but they want to move very quickly and push things forward. Kobolds tend to represent the more staid, let's try to keep things under control, if not just kind of bring things to a grinding halt because, well, they're kobolds who still kind of love COBOL. So that is the perspective that they come from. Okay. All right. So Richard, Heather, are you ready?
Yes.
I think so.
Okay, great. All right. First scenario. After several weeks, Questionable Ideas finally has a new CFO after the last one went missing. The goblins were involved in that, allegedly. The gremlins have a proposal. They say it is time to shake things up in response to how the world operates. They propose migrating from hyperscalers into a mix of sovereign cloud providers. The gremlins say that this will help the company adapt on a regulatory front, especially if data restrictions intensify internationally and if geopolitical situations change. But it will cost to make this move away from the current stable environments that the company has. And engineers will need to be retrained, and some of these cloud providers that the gremlins have chosen are untested and are practically unknown in some ways. And there may be questionable allegiances with these providers with their nation state governments. So the options here are, do you support this plan as is? Do you terminate it on the spot? Or do you find a way to rework this plan?
On my side, I would not move forward. I would terminate. We have looked and gotten a great deal of benefit from the hyperscalers, and I think being able to continue that and have the assurance around the stability and the privacy and the safeguards that are in place with are an important part, right? So anytime, and we all have cases where we'll work with a hosting provider for certain kinds of things that are maybe more one-off or for a period of time, but they typically are that, and it's not something that's part of a permanent solution. For me, fragmenting the approach to that and how you'd source it and the various regulations that would be involved in various markets across the world would be a risk that I wouldn't see the benefit outweighing the risk in that case.
Having built out what are in essence sovereign clouds in questionable locations in previous lives, I'm going to go for, I will support it, but we're going to make some changes to it. There are some things that we need to do, but I do actually believe that in terms of business enablement, there are absolutely scenarios where I need to have a sovereign cloud for data protection. I think that there is a very real risk that depending on where you go, the local cultural norms are not going to be what we are used to, and you need to make sure that you are legally and ethically above board, and there are those pieces. The most interesting part of this for me is that how do you not scale it out, it's the wrong word. How do you make sure that architecturally, when you do have customers who do want to be global but need to have sovereign cloud for data storage, how do you enable them? that's a whole other technical conversation that I can have another time, having dealt with that. But I actually think that this is, especially when we look at what is happening with AI and what we are seeing actually with some sovereign cloud requirements in the Middle East, that this is actually the way of the future.
On to the second scenario. The Cobalts think now's a good time to lock things down at the company. They want to introduce an AI security mesh that unifies identity management, insider threat detection, and other resources across all business units. This would replace the existing current several different security tools that can be used that works fine, and they've also met regulatory requirements. But this AI mesh would also spot shadow AI usage across the company and improve detection of attacks. However, this would cost more, and there are questions of AI governance. The Cobalts claim that it would be best to let the AI handle everything because people are fallible. While the CFO is looking at the numbers, the AI security mesh becomes increasingly proactive in its monitoring, including starting to bleed into personal devices, monitoring activity unrelated to the company. The Cobalts call this white hat AI oversight, a necessary proactive step. Do you support, terminate, or rework this plan?
I hate to say this, but I am a European company and I operate in some highly regulated places, and I would unfortunately probably have to terminate because of the rights on my employees. And it kills me because up until then, what you were describing was nirvana.
If there was an option or an opportunity to try to manage that kind of risk of encroaching on the personal space, I think to kind of echo what Heather's speaking of, we have and see real impact from some of that activity today. So the opportunity to be able to unite that some of those services and tools around usage and around identity access management, I think would be phenomenal. So that is certainly an area that we are focused on and working on multiple fronts. If there were solutions that would help unify that experience without some of the downside risk, that would be compelling and worth investing in.
Well, Cobalts appreciate the fact that there's some chance for the white hat AI oversight plan to work in some fashion, maybe not exactly the way it's currently tailored. Okay, on to scenario 3. The Goblins, who still plead the fifth about the disappearance of the last CFO, propose introducing a new digital twin effort specifically meant to model the company to operate faster. This light-speed twin does the usual predictions of equipment failures, simulating disruptions, and bolstering future automation plans, but is also a drain to get started. There's data integration, more cloud compute investment, plus time and energy from all business units to get this off the ground. And the costs are starting to build up, and there are very real concerns that this effort could also create a larger attack surface for bad actors to target. Plus, there are rumors that the Goblins are actually trying to use Lightspeed Twin to create a blueprint for their own rival company to operate with a smaller team. Do you support, kill, or rework this plan?
For me, I wouldn't have a lot of interest in the potential here. So I think our experiences or some of my other experiences have been that these efforts are a lot to be able to replicate in scenario, like in a real world scenario. And while good in practice or theory, I think the resources required, certainly for an organization like ours, right, more of a mid-tier firm, I think the cost or the resources required to be able to stand it up or to attempt it would not. I wouldn't pursue that. I'd look to kill that one.
I love arguing, but I'm going to go with Richard on this one. I'm not seeing it. I think that there are so many other things that we could do. To be totally honest, create a copy of my company. Look, that assumes the company is the technology, right? The company ultimately is the people, no matter how many there are. So worry less about that one, but I really worry about the distraction from what we're actually trying to do.
Well, the Goblins are disappointed that Lightspeed Twin did not take off and launch them into the stratosphere and into the stars, but you have control of things and you have locked them down and prevented them from doing more harm. Okay, so those are scenarios. Richard, Heather, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today. You've been fantastic. Appreciate your insight and navigating the questionable idea scenarios.
Thanks so much.